investigation is a science. It's all about reading the indicators.
The Mosquito Fire. We found where it started to better understand how it started and who may have started it. We continue to share stories from real women about what's not being talked about enough in women's health so that you don't have to suffer alone. And the 80-year-old promise that held through one of America's darkest times. Let's get to the point.
Welcome in. Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a great day. I'm going to take a deep breath. It's been a very busy day, but I hope you're having a great night at home. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, I'm Alex Bell, and tonight, you already know, we are getting to the point, but the origin point of the Mosquito Fire. That's the state's largest wildfire of the year, and it's now fully contained. Almost 2 months after it started in the Tahoe National Forest, now we are finally able to get a look at the PG&E power line that's under investigation for starting it. Our Brandon Ritteman made the trip up there and explains what's left.
The power line in question is just a 12-mile drive from the community of Forest Hill, but Mosquito Ridge Road is slow going, thanks to all the restoration work. We passed crews rebuilding PG&E power lines that burned up in the Mosquito Fire. The Forest Service escorted us into this part of the burn area. It's still closed to the public. Down at the middle fork of the American River next to Oxbow Reservoir, we found it, the 60,000-volt PG&E transmission line under investigation. We followed the line, looking for a break in the circuit, where Forest Service arson investigators seized parts as evidence, the origin point of the Mosquito Fire. It's right here, just in sight of the dam at the end of Oxbow Reservoir. There's a bend in the road, and we found this crew working to set grounding rods for the new steel poles that are going in here. Just uphill, we saw a brand new steel pole. The U.S. Forest Service took a whole one like it out of here as evidence. PG&E, which already has a rap sheet with 91 felony convictions, told its investors it's under criminal investigation for the Mosquito Fire.
Fire investigation is a science. It's all about reading the indicators of what the fire tells you what happened.
Kalina Lind, our guide, is a fire investigator. She can't comment on the Mosquito Fire probe, it's not hers. But she says even the simplest fire investigations can take a week or longer. A big fire like this one can take months. The case has to be thorough enough to hold up in court, and getting it right matters.
If we learn how it happened, we can better prepare for keeping it from happening again.
Nobody burned to death in the Mosquito Fire, but it did burn 78 buildings. If this fire is ruled PG&E's fault, it would be the 6th year in a row for the company. We may not know until next year. In the Tahoe National Forest, Brandon Ritteman, ABC 10 News.
This week, Governor Newsom requested a presidential major disaster declaration in response to this summer's wildfires. The declaration is meant to help get people back into their homes in a number of counties, including El Dorado and Placer. Now, nearly 900 buildings were destroyed by fires in California so far this year. This chart gives you a better idea of last year's fire season compared to this year's and the average over the last 5 years. Now, last year was intense, no doubt about that. It wasn't an outlier, but this year so far, only about a seventh of the acres have burned in the state compared to 2021. And even though there's been close to the same number of fires, less than the state has physically burned. Earlier today, we spoke with CAL FIRE. They credit more aggressive firefighting and resources for this year's decreased acreage.
I'd say one of the big factors, aggressive firefighting. We brought on additional aircraft that were positioned throughout the state. We've brought on additional firefighters over this season. And those are two big factors of being able to get to those fires quickly and knocking them out and getting them contained quicker than they would have if we wouldn't have had those resources. Another big one is obviously the public. The public is becoming very fire-wise and very savvy.
Yeah, that's right. And CAL FIRE did want to make it clear that while this year hasn't been nearly as bad as years past, fire season is not over. Our Brendan Minchev joins us now to explain the fire risk and what's going to change in the next coming days. Brendan.
Yeah, so as we look at fire danger over the next few days, you can see most of Northern California in that yellow category, which is that dry category. It's not very dry. It's not in that high risk. It's dry. And it will be a little bit breezy at times. So fire danger, not significant, but it's also not non-existent either. It is still there, and it really is always there. Fire season never ends. But one of the things we can look at to see as the fire season changes and how much of a threat a large fire can be, we can look at something called the energy release component. And so the blue line is showing you the current state of fuels in the Sierra, in the northern Sierra here. And you can see that the fuel potential, the energy release potential went way up when we saw that record heat at the start of September. But when we had the rain later on in the month, you can see the energy release went way down. There was less energy there because there was more moisture on the ground, more moisture in plants, more moisture in the fuels. And so that helped tame the fire season, if just for a few days. But you can see it's since gone back up, but it's nowhere near its top, its peak that it was at the start of September, but it is still above average. And so again, fire danger is something we're always watching, and we're not really going to get rid of fire danger in any meaningful way until we finally get some rainfall, which looks like it might be on the horizon. So this is Tuesday, November 1st, and we can see some rain starting to overspread the valley, and then even some snow in the highest elevations, potentially 5,000 feet or higher. Something we'll keep an eye on, but you can see as we progress Tuesday through Wednesday, even through Thursday morning, precipitation is lingering in Northern California. That's good news. But until we get some meaningful rainfall, it's important to remember burning yard debris, got to keep that pile small, no more than 4 feet by 4 feet. Campfires, you want to find an open space away from logs, brush, pine needles, and never ever leave your campfire unattended. And driving, simply if you have chains, make sure they're secured so that they're not dragging on the concrete, sparking, and don't drive on dry grass because the underbelly of your car can be very hot.
All right, Brendan, thank you. When we come back, you'll hear from a woman sharing her story with pelvic floor pain, a common disorder that is honestly not talked about enough. So we'll have more details when we come back. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. We all reach a point where our bodies just start to change, especially for those who have had a child. So tonight we are once again talking about pelvic floor pain because it's a very common medical issue that goes overlooked for a lot of people. So I wanted to share real stories of women who have given birth because women's health, it's not talked about enough. So you're about to meet a mom who is an occupational therapist. She suffered from pelvic pain during her pregnancy and wants women to know that this is treatable and you don't have to suffer in pain or be embarrassed.
Been a practicing occupational therapist for 15 years, and the majority of that time was spent in skilled nursing. And then after having my own children, then I made the switch to women's health, to pelvic health. It kind of fell into my lap, really, in a way. I had been interested in postpartum care and birthing and women's health since the birth of my daughter, my first child, and just realizing the void in care that I experienced. Not feeling like my needs had really been met and not even being sure like what those needs were and not knowing, it just feels like totally vague and formless. And you had a baby and now everyone cares about the baby. And you're like, oh yeah, you're there too, right? It doesn't feel like the same level of care that you get when you're pregnant is present after birth. At least it didn't for me. So I definitely had some pain during pregnancy. I had pubic symphysis disorder, which is when the front of your pelvis shifts a little bit, which can be very uncomfortable. It can make walking painful, standing on one leg painful. So you're trying to put on your pants, trying to put on your shoes. You just get this like sharp pain in the front of your pelvis. So I had that in both pregnancies and didn't know that it's normal, but it's something that is definitely treatable and you don't have to suffer with. And I just thought, oh, pregnancy, aches and pains, like this is normal. I completely wish that I had gone to a pelvic floor therapist to figure out the pain issues during pregnancy. I think sometimes the emotional impact of labor and delivery is something that we kind of underestimate. Every birth is different, so you can't really ever anticipate what's going to happen. There's an emotional component to it and a psychological component to it that I think can sometimes be undervalued or underaddressed as well. I think is really important too, that everybody understands there's no gold medal for having a baby a certain way, right? You have a baby vaginally, you have a baby by C-section, you have it with medication, without medication. There's no easy way to have a baby, and there's no best way to have a baby except what's best for an individual person. Everybody has different life experiences coming into it, and therefore they have different needs. And I think it's important that we hold space for all those different options and not, make this image of, what's the right way to have a baby or what's a perfect birth. You just have to, do the best you can and then have a little grace for yourself that whatever it was, you did it and you made it through.
And I do want to say a quick thank you to the moms that I spoke with. Hopefully other moms see this and know that they're not alone either. But if you do feel like you have a pelvic floor disorder, make sure that you contact your healthcare provider so you can get the healthcare that you need. Now, tomorrow we will continue our Women's Health series, and you'll hear from Hinge Health. They are a healthcare group that is really focused on offering access to pelvic floor therapy care specifically. And I sat down with them because recently they launched a digital program that focused specifically on this type of treatment. So I wanted to talk about pelvic floor therapy because this is not a fringe issue. It impacts 1 in 4 women. 1 in 4 women. So you probably know someone who's suffering from this. Hinge Health says on average, it takes a woman 6.5 years to seek care because they are led to believe that what they're feeling is normal. So we'll have more coming up tomorrow. Imagine if the government forced you to sell everything that you owned and forced you to live behind barbed wire, unsure if you were a loyal citizen. Thousands of Japanese Americans don't have to imagine it. They lived it. But their stories are seldom heard and take up very little space in the history books. Van 2 shares how a promise between friends 80 years ago overcame a very dark period in American history in tonight's Point in Time.
It's a milestone.
My name is Lucille
Fit for a special celebration.
Tokuno. I just turned 100.
An outpouring of love for Lucille Harumi Takuno, surrounded by generations of family.
To have my family and friends.
She says her secret to longevity is holding on to hope.
For me, looking forward to each day.
Born and raised in Sacramento, Takuno was a typical American girl who enjoyed dressing up with her sisters, jumping on trends like denim jeans for women. Lady Levi's were released in 1934, 5 years before World War II. She wore them stylishly in this photo with her father, Kazu Tanaka, a first-generation Japanese immigrant who was ineligible for citizenship, known as Issei. Takuno is second-generation Japanese, known as Nisei, American-born and a U.S. citizen. Yet her and her father's lives changed in an instant.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor,
following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order to relocate tens of thousands of Japanese families to concentration camps. California defined anyone with at least 1/16 Japanese blood as a potential Japanese loyalist who should be interned. Takuno's son, Dean Takuno, says he only learned of this chapter in American history as a teen, an experience his mother lived through but never spoke of.
When the war came about, Japanese Americans were not allowed to take anything more than they could carry, and that was it.
Takuno's family was sent hundreds of miles north,
Then Tule Lake.
the only place she called home. Her father forced to sell their family restaurant in Old Sacramento.
They had nobody to give the land to or hold it for them. So as a consequence, they lost it. Heartbreaking, actually, but that's what happened.
But a silver lining. Tule Lake is also where a young Lucille met Dean's father, Ted Takuno.
She was smitten. He didn't know, but he was going to marry her.
Ted Takuno, born in Palermo, California, was also Nisei.
Well, he was considered a dangerous Japanese.
Dangerous because he was licensed to carry out demolitions and to fly planes as a farm worker.
He was scrutinized very heavily, and that had an effect on him.
Like Lucille's father, Ted's father also had to sell off property, including a 20-acre ranchette in the southwest portion of Yuba City, just beyond the Yuba Buttes.
My grandfather was a first-generation Japanese, he could barely speak English.
But Dean says a friend bought the ranchette for $1 with the promise of selling the land back.
And yet he hands the keys to his everything he owned to this Caucasian man who says, I'll take care of it for you. I'll give it back to you for $1 when you get back.
The promise was kept.
This piece of property that we're on right now is the piece of property that my grandfather Bunda Takuno bought from my dad.
Sutter County records show a widow, Laura B. Davis, sold the farm back to Ted and Lucille Takuno in 1946. At the time, Japanese faces were that of the enemy. The American Institute of Public Opinion found only 1% of Americans opposed the internment of Japanese non-citizens.
My grandfather chose the right friend, and it's remarkable. It's about honor. That's what it comes down to.
Japanese Americans were given $20,000 in restitution and an apology letter.
My father still hung on to that. One of his most prized possessions. He said, what I've needed since the end of the war was this letter.
Generations of Takunos have since made memories on the farm, and Lucille says her husband's contributions are cherished.
He loved the farm. Been here over 50 years, and I still love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
Looking back at her life,
oh my goodness. Oh, I didn't know he had that.
Lucille says her love of dance carried her through the handful of years at Tule Lake.
I taught dancing. I had a little studio where I had many young people.
And her life with many favorite songs to dance to, from the 1950 Doors Day classic.
We will raise a family, a boy for you, a little girl for me.
It's a blessing for me.
She says her life isn't defined by war, but of love.
I think my greatest achievement is having a family and seeing them grow and enjoying life. That's what it's all about.
In Van, Lucille Takuno, she passed about 3 months after you interviewed her.
Yeah, and we interviewed her on her 100th birthday, and her son Dean told me that it was her goal to reach that age of 100. And when she did pass, she went with grace, dignity, and courage.
And a Wisconsin school board earlier this year, they banned a novel telling the story of Japanese American internment. And it's so often that stories like the Takuno family, they're not often heard or shared, are they?
No, they really aren't. And Alex, this is a Takuno family story that was obviously shared within the family, of course, but it wasn't publicly told until they granted us this interview. And in reflecting on his mother and his father's lives, Dean, Lucille's son, says he really sees the importance of sharing these untold American stories, especially in the case of World War II and the Japanese internment. He says we're reaching a time when the people who lived this reality are disappearing from the landscape. So he says it's really important that these short stories are preserved.
Yeah, and we're honored to tell the family story as well. Van, thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate it. All right, let's get a quick look outside at our Gilmore backyard here. Cooler temperatures as we're now into fall, thankfully. Sacramento seeing 68 degrees, Stockton at 70, Tahoe at 44, and your 10-day forecast as we get closer to the weekend. Before we go, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has been watching to the point and everyone who has reached out. You at home are the reason why we do what we do, and we could not do it without you. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I will see you tomorrow. Hey, it's Alex. Just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I really love hearing from everyone, and I hope that you'll stay in touch. Reach out to me on Facebook at AlexBellTV, or you can email me at tothepoint@abc10.com, or you can even send me a text message at 916-321-3310.